The species that was never supposed to laugh. The warship Eternal Ascendancy dropped out of hyperspace in a burst of violet fire. It was enormous. Not just large by any reasonable measure, but deliberately architecturally enormous. Its designers had spent decades calculating the exact dimensions required to make any intelligent species feel small the moment they saw it. 6 kilometers of black alloy hull, engraved from bow to stern with the death masks of conquered civilizations. Bones from 100 different species were sealed behind transparent panels along the outer hull, visible from any approaching vessel. Not trophies, warnings. The Zharathi Dominion had been perfecting this entrance for 11,000 years. Ambassador Veth Khan stood in the preparation chamber, running his ritual check. He was 3 meters tall, his body wrapped in deep violet chitin, his 4 eyes burning a steady amber. Across his thorax he wore the sashes of subjugation, each one representing a species brought to its knees before the Dominion. He had 43 sashes. He intended to add a 44th today. His aide, a younger Zharathi named Ozrak, reviewed the intelligence report one final time. The Terrans, Ozrak said, the word carrying the same clinical detachment he might use for a geological survey. 312 years in space. 47 settled systems. Military force estimated at fewer than 90 active warships. No recorded interstellar conflicts in the past 2 centuries. They are, by every metric, a peripheral species. And their homeworld? A single ocean planet third from a yellow star. Moderate size unremarkable. Veth Khan straightened his sashes. 43 civilizations. Each one had followed the same script. The Eternal Ascendancy appeared. He delivered the proclamation they begged. Some wept. Some offered tribute before he even finished speaking. The Dominion's method was not cruelty for its own sake. It was efficiency. Fear was simply the fastest path to order. He descended to the docking bay where the Terran shuttle had already been cleared to dock. 16 Zharathi honor guards fell into formation around him, their plasma lances humming at low charge. The bay lighting had been calibrated to throw dramatic shadows. The temperature had been lowered to create discomfort without causing harm. Even the acoustics had been tuned so that his voice would boom with unnatural resonance when he spoke. Every detail engineered for one purpose: surrender. The Terran shuttle sat quietly in the center of the bay. It was a modest craft, smooth white hull with a blue stripe, slightly scuffed near the landing gear. It looked like something that made regular supply runs. No armor plating, no visible weapon systems. 3 humans stood beside it. Veth Khan studied them as he approached. 2 males, 1 female. The female appeared to be the senior figure. She had dark red hair pulled back tightly, a lined face that suggested considerable age and the calm posture of someone waiting for a transit connection. She was holding a container that emitted steam. One of the males was reviewing something on a small handheld device. The other was leaning against the shuttle with his arms folded, staring at the ceiling of the docking bay with what appeared to be idle curiosity. None of them looked up when Veth Khan entered. He let the silence stretch. This was part of the method. Let them feel the weight of the pause. Let them become aware of the guards, the weapons, the sheer scale of the ship around them. The woman finally glanced over. She raised her free hand in a small wave. You must be the Zharathi. Good crossing? We've been waiting about 40 minutes, just so you know. She glanced at her companion. Is that the right word? Crossing? Transit, he said without looking up from his device. Or passage. Either works. Transit, she repeated agreeably, and took a sip from her container. Veth Khan drew himself to his full height. He spread his upper limbs wide. The guards snapped to attention. The lights responded on cue, darkening at the edges of the bay and throwing a pale radiance directly onto him. He allowed himself one moment of stillness, the way a predator pauses before speaking. I am Ambassador Veth Khan of the Zharathi Dominion, he said, his voice filling the chamber like a physical force. We are the architects of order across this galaxy. We have subjugated 43 species. We have ended wars before they began, toppled civilizations that dared resist and reshaped the known galaxy in our image for 11,000 years. He paused. You have been found. The humans looked at one another. The man with the handheld device slowly lowered it. His mouth was pressed into a tight line. His shoulders had begun to shake. The woman set down her steam container very carefully on the shuttle step, as though she needed both hands free. Her jaw was clenched. Her eyes were bright. You have one planetary rotation to consider our terms, Vethkan continued, building toward the crescendo. Surrender your governance, your fleets, your territorial claims. In return, you will exist. You will contribute. You will be part of something greater than your small and unremarkable civilization could ever hope to. The woman made a sound. A strangled, high-pitched sound. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her whole body shook once. Then she started laughing, not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh. A full, genuine, helpless laugh. The kind that bends a person at the waist. Within 4 seconds, all 3 humans were laughing. The one leaning against the shuttle slid down its hull until he was crouching, one hand on his knee, the other wiping at his eyes. The man with the device turned his back entirely, shoulders heaving. Vethkan stood perfectly still. In 11,000 years of recorded Dominion history, no species had ever laughed. I'm sorry, the woman finally managed, pressing both hands flat against her face, trying to push the expression back into something professional. I am genuinely deeply sorry. We were briefed. We knew the protocol. I thought I was ready. She exhaled hard through her nose. I was not ready. This is not a performance, Vethkan said. His voice had lost some of its engineered resonance. We are the Zharathi Dominion. I know, she said, still catching her breath. And that chip is genuinely impressive. The bones on the outside were a choice. Very committed aesthetic. She extended a hand. Captain Nadia Orel, Terran Diplomatic Service. I really did intend to handle this professionally. You find conquest amusing? I find the presentation very familiar, she said, and something in her voice shifted just slightly. The warmth didn't disappear, but something underneath it changed, like watching a very old film, one we've seen before. No species has ever refused our terms before the negotiation was complete. Orel tilted her head. We haven't refused anything yet. We haven't even heard the terms. I laughed because... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because the last time someone stood in front of us with that exact posture and said those exact words, they were in a museum exhibit about pre-unification Earth. She picked her steam container back up. You reminded me of something we used to do to each other. It was a reflex. I apologize. Used to do, Vethkan repeated. Yes. She looked at him steadily. Used to. He studied her face. There was no malice in it. No performance of courage, no hidden terror behind the eyes. Just a kind of tired familiarity that he could not account for. You will surrender, he said, or your world will face the consequences. Nadia Orel nodded slowly. I heard you. Here's what I'd like you to hear in return. She wrapped both hands around her container. Go home. Take your fleet. Re-enter hyperspace and file a report that says humanity wasn't worth the approach vector. I'm asking you sincerely, as one sentient being to another. That is not a warning you are in any position to give. No, she said quietly. It's not a warning at all. She held his gaze for a long moment. It's a regret. Offered in advance, behind Vethkan, one of his guards shifted uneasily. He did not look back. He was too busy trying to understand why those words, from this small, unimpressive species on this unremarkable posting, had made something cold move through his chest. On the shuttle's interior screen, unseen by anyone in the bay, a single line of text was already transmitting back to Earth. They don't know. Initiating notification to Defense Council. Please advise. What the archives said Ambassador Vethkan could not sleep. This was unusual. He had conducted 43 first contacts. He had stood before species that wept, species that groveled, species that screamed and threatened and ultimately surrendered. None of them had kept him awake afterward. The humans had not even refused yet. They had laughed, offered a polite warning he did not understand, and returned to their shuttle. His fleet had taken up a standard encirclement formation around their star system. Everything was proceeding correctly. And yet, he sent a request to the Dominion's analysis division. He wanted to understand what made the Terrans so certain, what gave them the specific quality of calm that he had not seen in 43 previous species. The division director, a scholar named Sithavel, responded within hours. She met him in the archive chamber and she was already pale. I assumed their historical database was exaggerated, she said. Species often inflate their own histories. I spent the first 4 hours discounting figures. She paused. Then I started cross-referencing with independent sources. With archaeological data, with records from species that had contact with them before we did. Her voice was quiet and steady in the way that voices become when a person is making a deliberate effort not to let them shake. The figures are accurate. She brought up the display. Humanity's recorded history of conflict stretched back 12,000 years. The casualty figures were presented in a simple column. Vethkan read them twice because he was certain he had misread them the first time. He had not. 2 billion, he said. That is the estimated total of humans killed by other humans over their recorded history, Sithavel said, before they achieved spaceflight. On a single planet, fighting themselves. Vethkan looked at the number for a long moment. Then he looked at the number of species the Zharathi Dominion had subjugated over 11,000 years, and the total casualties those conquests had produced. The human number was larger, by a considerable margin. Show me the specific conflicts, he said. She showed him. She walked him through them one by one. Wars that lasted decades. Wars fought across continents. Wars where the stated goal was the complete extermination of another group of humans. She showed him the industrial scale of it, the organization, the logistics, the sheer administrative effort that human civilizations had poured into the project of killing one another. This one, she said, pausing on a specific event, 6 years, 70 to 85 million dead, fought on a single planet with weapons that, at the time, were considered primitive by their own later standards. She let that sit for a moment. For context, our most costly campaign, the subjugation of the Threll Compact, lasted 9 years and produced 11 million casualties. And we consider that the defining trauma of our military history. They fought this war before they had basic energy weapons, Vethkan said. Yes. With projectile firearms and chemical munitions. Crude by any standard. She changed the display. But watch the development timeline. The weapons timeline appeared. Stone tools, bronze, iron, gunpowder, mass production firearms, chemical weapons, aerial bombardment, nuclear fission. All of it compressed into a fraction of the time it had taken the Zharathi to develop from hand tools to plasma lances. Their wars drove their technology, Sithavel said. Every major weapons breakthrough in their history was preceded by a conflict that demanded it. They innovated under pressure. They innovated while fighting. They refined, adapted, and deployed new killing methods in the middle of active wars. They didn't develop technology in controlled scholarly conditions and then test it. They tested it on each other in real time, against opponents who were simultaneously trying to develop counters. They trained against the hardest possible enemy, Vethkan said slowly. Themselves. Yes. She pulled up one final section of data, and then they stopped. The date appeared, approximately 200 years ago by Zharathi reckoning. The wars didn't end gradually. They ended with a specific technological threshold, a weapon so absolute, so mutually destructive, that using it would kill the user alongside the target. The humans had called the doctrine surrounding it mutually assured destruction. They had lived for 4 decades with enough of these weapons pointed at each other to destroy their world dozens of times over, and then they had chosen to stop. They were not conquered. Feth Khan said. No. No external species forced them to peace. They frightened themselves into it. Sithavel sat down, her chitin moving in the quiet way that indicated exhaustion. And this is the part that troubles me most, Ambassador. The part that I think the Council needs to understand before we proceed. She folded her hands. Every species we have ever encountered that was at peace when we found them had been at peace for a long time. They had evolved away from aggression, or they had been at peace long enough that war had become genuinely foreign to them. Abstract, historical, and the humans. 200 years, she said. That is not long enough to forget. That is not long enough to breed it out of their culture, their instincts, their reflexes. They've had 2 centuries of peace, but they carry 10,000 years of war in everything they build, everything they teach their children, every story they tell, every game they play. She looked at him directly. They are not a peaceful species, Ambassador. They are a warlike species that is currently choosing peace. Those are not the same thing. They are not the same thing at all. Veth Khan stood very still. What is your recommendation? Sithavel was quiet for a long moment. I have sent this data to the Grand Council. My recommendation was that we withdraw and reclassify the Terrans as a monitored civilization. She paused. The Grand Executor dismissed my report as analytical cowardice. Veth Khan looked at the display, at the casualty figures, at the weapons timeline, at the image of a mushroom-shaped cloud rising over a city that humans had destroyed using a weapon they then built thousands more of and pointed at themselves. What did Captain Oral mean? He said quietly, when she called it a regret offered in advance. Sithavel did not answer immediately. I think, she said finally, that she meant she was sorry for what would happen. Not sorry as a threat. Sorry as a person who could see what was coming and could not stop it. A long pause. Ambassador, I have studied 46 species in my career. I have never, in any species' historical record, found a philosopher who wrote the following. She brought up a passage from a human archive. The most dangerous warrior is not the one who loves battle. It is the one who has seen enough of it to hate it, who understands exactly what it costs, and yet still knows precisely how to wage it. That warrior has no illusions, no mercy, and nothing left to lose by winning cleanly. Veth Khan read it 3 times. Who wrote this? A human general, Sithavel said. 216 years ago, shortly before they put down their weapons. She closed the display. They have thousands of texts like this, Ambassador. Their warriors wrote philosophy. Their philosophers advised generals. They spent 10,000 years thinking very carefully about war, and then they walked away from it. She stood. The Grand Executor has ordered the punishment fleet to proceed to their colony at Kepler's Rest. 4,800 colonists. Minimal defenses, she met his eyes. They think it will be a demonstration. Outside the archive, a deep vibration moved through the hull of the Eternal Ascendancy as the punishment fleet broke from formation and jumped to hyperspace. Veth Khan stood alone in the archive chamber, surrounded by 11,000 years of Zharathi conquest, reading a 200-year-old text written by a human soldier, and feeling for the first time in his career that he was standing in the wrong place entirely. Everything they remembered. The punishment fleet arrived at Kepler's Rest in the pre-dawn hours of the colony's local time. Fleet Commander Darak Shen surveyed the target from his command bridge. The colony was modest, spread across a temperate valley between 2 mountain ranges. Population indicators showed 4,800 registered residents. Orbital scans revealed 2 defensive platforms, both outdated, and a single patrol vessel currently docked for maintenance. The colony's communications array was already transmitting a distress signal on civilian frequencies. Begin suppression fire, Darak Shen ordered. Target the defensive platforms first, then the communications relay, then infrastructure. It was over in 3 hours. The defensive platforms were destroyed in the first pass. The colony's power grid went dark. The maintenance-docked patrol vessel, half-assembled, never lifted. The distress signal transmitted for 11 minutes before the relay was taken out. Narration filed his report with the Grand Council. The message was clear. Resist us, and this is what resistance costs. On Earth, the distress signal was received before the relay was destroyed. It was 11 minutes of audio and visual data. The United Nations Emergency Assembly was convened within the hour. The recording was played in full once in complete silence. When it ended, nobody spoke for almost 2 minutes. Then Defense Secretary Hamid Farouk said very quietly, "Civilians." "Yes," said General Yelena Vasilyev, commander of the Terran Defense Force. She had the specific stillness of a person who had long ago decided what she would do if this moment ever came, and was now simply confirming that the moment had arrived. "They know we have a small fleet," said the Secretary General. "They know the size of our active military," Vasilyev said. "They don't know what that number means." She set a data pad on the table. "I'm requesting authorization for full industrial mobilization. Article 7, Total War Protocols, silence." The words were so old that some of the younger assembly members had only read them in history texts. "Every hand in favor," said the Secretary General. Every hand rose. What happened in the following 72 hours was not, strictly speaking, a military mobilization. It was something older. Something that human civilization had not done in 2 centuries but had never fully forgotten how to do. Because the knowledge was too useful to discard and too dangerous to ever quite trust yourself to need again. The shipyards changed first. Civilian construction yards that had been building deep space freighters and colony transports began receiving new specifications overnight. The workers who showed up for their morning shifts found their supervisors already on site, the new schematics already loaded, the material orders already filed. Nobody had to be told twice. The first warship frames were being assembled within 36 hours of the vote. Material flowed from mining operations that had been feeding civilian construction projects for decades. Corporations that had spent generations competing with one another began coordinating supply chains without being asked. The infrastructure was already there. The knowledge was already there. The people were already there. The thing that the Zharathi had not understood, the thing that their intelligence reports had not captured, was that a civilization's military capacity is not measured by the size of its standing army. It is measured by the speed at which it can transition everything else into an army. Humans had done this before. Several times. They had done it so many times that the pattern was embedded in their institutions, their laws, their industrial planning, their cultural memory. They had spent 2 centuries at peace, but they had never stopped designing systems that could be converted, because they remembered. Because forgetting felt too much like gambling. 40 days after the attack on Kepler's Rest, the Terran Defense Force had 400 new warships. The training cadres that had been running drills and war games and simulations through 20 years of unbroken peace were now commanding real fleets. The soldiers who had been practicing tactics in virtual environments were now walking the corridors of real warships. And every single one of them moved with the ease of people doing something they had been rehearsing for a very long time. The first engagement came at Arcturus Station, a Zharathi resupply depot at the edge of human space. Fleet Commander Narration was given command of the response force. He arrayed his ships in the formation that Zharathi doctrine had refined over 3,000 years of interstellar warfare. A deep wedge, aggressive and structured, designed to force an enemy into a direct confrontation where superior firepower could be brought to bear. He sent the formal engagement signal, as was proper. Challenge and response, an honorable declaration of intent before battle. The human fleet, which had appeared on the edge of sensor range 20 minutes earlier, split in half. Half of it jumped to hyperspace, the other half retreated. Narration read the situation as a rout. He pressed the advance, extending his formation to pursue. The retreating human ships drew him forward, further into the debris field surrounding the station. where his sensors had to work harder to resolve accurate readings. Then the first half of the human fleet reappeared. Not in front of him, not behind him. In 6 locations simultaneously, distributed around his formation at angles that no formal battle doctrine had prepared him for, because the angles required splitting a fleet into units so small that Zharathi military theory classified them as tactically incoherent. They were not incoherent. They were a perfect killing geometry. The firing began without warning, without declaration, without any of the ritual pause that structured Zharathi warfare. Railfire, plasma, and mass driver rounds came from 6 directions at once. Darakshan's shields handled the first volley. The second volley hit before the first had finished resolving. The third came before his crew had finished processing the second. The battle lasted 4 hours. It should not have been close. The Zharathi fleet had more ships, more firepower, more combat experience measured in formal engagements. What they did not have was 200 years of wargaming against themselves, studying every engagement in 12,000 years of human military history, designing tactics to counter an enemy that thought exactly the way they did, and then playing those tactics against simulated opponents that adapted, improved, and got harder every month. The Zharathi fought with honor and discipline and 3,000 years of refined tradition. The humans fought to end the battle as quickly as possible, by any method available, because they had learned very early in their own history that a short war costs less than a long one, and that mercy during combat was not the same thing as mercy after it. The Zharathi elite ground force, the imperishable, were deployed to the station's surface installations in the battle's 3rd hour. They had a record of 1,100 years without a battlefield defeat. They were the finest soldiers the Dominion had ever produced. Their discipline was absolute, their training comprehensive, their morale unshakable. The Terran Marine unit they encountered had been scheduled for a rotation leave that was canceled when the mobilization order came through. The Marines were not unhappy about this. Exactly. But they were not pleased. This particular state of not quite anger translated, in the corridors and maintenance tunnels of Arcturus Station, into a style of combat that the imperishable could not classify using any category in their tactical library. The humans did not fight in formation. They fought in the specific fluid, adaptive, ruthless way of people who had grown up playing competitive strategy games, reading military history for entertainment, and training in scenarios specifically designed to make conventional tactics fail. The imperishable were used to opponents who, when outmaneuvered, retreated or capitulated. The Marines did not retreat. When outmaneuvered, they simply changed the parameters of the engagement until they were no longer outmaneuvered. They used the station's architecture as a weapon. They used its environmental systems as a weapon. They used the imperishable's own discipline as a weapon. Because a force that responds predictably to a situation is a force that can be led into situations. Of the 4,000 imperishable deployed to Arcturus Station, 340 were captured. The rest were casualties. The Zharathi prisoner, a senior officer named Keth Varan, was brought before the Marine commander. Keth Varan had been in battles before. He had been in difficult battles. He had never been afraid in the way he was afraid now, and he could not entirely articulate why. The Marines had treated him correctly. They had given him medical attention and water and a place to sit, but he had watched them fight. And what troubled him, what he could not stop thinking about, was that they had not seemed angry. They had not seemed bloodthirsty. They had seemed, in the worst possible way, professional. As though this were something they knew how to do, had always known how to do, and were simply doing now that it was required. The Marine commander, a broad-shouldered woman named Sergeant Major Adaize Okonkwo, sat across from him and lit a cigarette. "You fought well," Keth Varan told her. He meant it as acknowledgement between soldiers. She considered this for a moment. "We know," she said. Not arrogantly, just factually. "What are you?" he asked. Okonkwo took a long pull from her cigarette, looked at him steadily, and said, "We're what you get when you give a species 10,000 years of war, and then ask them to please be patient for a little while." Word of Arcturus reached the Grand Council 20 days later. By that point, there were 7 more engagements to report, and all 7 were identical in outcome. 42 days after the vote in the United Nations, the Terran Defense Force had 100 active warships. 60 days after, the number was 2,400. The shipyards did not slow down. The resource pipelines did not thin. The production numbers climbed with the steady, terrible logic of a civilization that had been building things for a very long time and had simply redirected where they aimed. The Grand Executor called the Supremacy Council into emergency session. The chamber was the oldest in the Dominion, built from stone quarried on the founding world 11,000 years ago. It had seen the planning of every major campaign, every conquest, every moment of Zharathi greatness. It had never seen what it saw now, which was 12 of the most powerful individuals in the Dominion, sitting in silence reading battle reports, and finding nothing in them that looked like an exit. "We have lost 49 engagements," the Council's military advisor reported. "We have lost no engagements to a superior force. We have lost all of them to a smaller force that has, in every case, chosen the time and geometry of contact in ways our doctrine did not anticipate." "How?" the Grand Executor said. "A single flat word. They have records," the advisor said. "Every battle humans have ever fought in 12,000 years is recorded, analyzed, and filed. Their military academies spend decades studying these records. Their wargame simulations are built around these records. When our fleet commanders deploy a formation that has not been used in 600 years, the Terrans recognize it. They have a counter for it. They have had a counter for it for 3 centuries. A pause. We are not fighting soldiers who are learning. We are fighting soldiers who already know." Ambassador Veth Khan stepped forward. He had been standing at the edge of the chamber, listening. He had not spoken yet. "I told you," he said. There was no satisfaction in it. Just weariness. "I told you when I came back from the first contact. I told you Captain Oral's exact words. She said it was a regret offered in advance." He looked at the Grand Executor. She was sorry for what she already knew was going to happen, because she recognized the shape of it. Her species had done it to themselves over and over across 10,000 years. She knew exactly how it ended. "Can we win?" the Grand Executor asked. The chamber was quiet for a long time. "No," Veth Khan said finally. "We couldn't have won from the beginning. The only question we've been deciding since that first meeting in the docking bay is how long this goes on and how much it costs." He looked at the Council. "Their fleet is outside our home system. They've been there for 3 days. They have not fired a single shot." "They're waiting," said one Council member. "Yes," Veth Khan said. "They're waiting for us." Outside the chamber, the stars were visible through an observation window. Among them, barely distinguishable from the background field, or the running lights of 2,000 Terran warships. Still, patient, carrying enough firepower to reduce the Zharathi homeworld to rubble, not firing. The most dangerous species in the galaxy was sitting outside their door and choosing, at this specific moment, not to use what it carried. And that restraint, Veth Khan understood, was not weakness. That restraint was the most frightening thing he had ever seen, because it was a choice. And it could be unmade, the weight of what they carried. The fleet had been holding position for 72 hours when Captain Nadia Oral's shuttle requested clearance to land on the Zharathi homeworld. She came with 4 people. No guards, no weapons. She was carrying, as she had been at their first meeting, a thermos of coffee. Veth Khan met her at the landing pad. He looked at the shuttle, at her small team, at the 2,000 warships visible in the night sky above them like a second constellation. Then he looked at her face. She looked tired. "You've been waiting," he said. "Yes," she said. "We wanted to give the Council time to think." She glanced up at the ships. "We didn't want to knock on the door while they were still processing. You could have ended this 3 days ago. Orel looked at him steadily. We know. He walked her to the council chamber. She sat down without being offered a chair, put her thermos on the table, and looked at 12 of the most powerful Zharathi alive, with the same calm she had shown in the docking bay of the Eternal Ascendancy. Thank you for meeting with me, she said. I know that isn't easy under the circumstances. Grand Executor Vethmar studied her. He had ruled the Dominion for 40 years. He had ordered the conquest of 11 civilizations. He had never in his life been uncertain in the way he was uncertain now. You're here for our surrender, he said. State your terms. We're not here for your surrender, Orel said. Silence. You're not, Vethmar repeated. No. She opened a display on the table's projection surface. We're here to propose something we're calling the Galactic Continuity Framework. A cooperative structure, equal membership, decisions made by consensus, no dominant species, no hierarchy of conquest. Vethkon watched the council members' faces. He saw confusion, suspicion, and something else underneath both of those things, something that looked cautiously like hope. Why, Vethmar said. The word came out smaller than he intended. Orel wrapped both hands around her thermos. Because we're scared, she said. Scared. Of ourselves. She looked at the table for a moment, then back up. Let me be direct with you. We spent 6 weeks fighting your fleet. In 6 weeks we lost 61,000 people. You lost 2.1 million. That ratio is not something we're proud of. That ratio is something we find deeply disturbing. She stood and walked to the window. The warships were visible above. We are very good at war. We have always been very good at war. For 10,000 years that was the most important thing about us. And then we decided it wasn't going to be the most important thing anymore. She turned back. Do you know what it took for us to make that decision? No one answered. We built a weapon that could destroy our entire planet, she said. And then we pointed it at ourselves. 2 sides. Enough nuclear warheads to crack the surface 40 times over. We lived like that for 40 years. But we called it deterrence. What it really was underneath all the strategy and doctrine was 2 halves of one species holding knives to each other's throats, realizing that if either side moved, everyone died. She paused. We chose to put the knives down. But putting them down wasn't the hard part. Vethmar leaned forward. What was the hard part? Knowing we could pick them up again, Orel said quietly. Knowing that the knowledge didn't go away when we made the choice. Knowing that we were 2 centuries of peace sitting on top of 10,000 years of war, and that all it would take to unlock the second thing was a reason. She looked at the table. You gave us a reason. You attacked Kepler's Rest, you killed civilians. And do you know what happened inside us when we heard that news? No one spoke. We weren't afraid, she said. We weren't even angry, not exactly. It was more like recognition. Like something old and familiar woke up and said, oh, it's time. She set the thermos down. And within 72 hours we were building warships. Within 40 days we had 400 of them. Not because we had been secretly planning a war, but because that's what we do. That's what we've always done. The infrastructure was already there. The knowledge was already there. We just stopped pointing it at ourselves. General Vasiliev, who had come with Orel and sat quietly at the end of the table, spoke for the first time. We could have glassed this world, she said. Her voice was not cruel. It was simply informational. We had the capability after the first month. We held back. Holding back was not easy. Why did you? Vethkon asked. Because we have a word for what happens when a war goes on long enough that winning stops being the goal, Vasiliev said. We have a word for it because it has happened to us before, more than once. When a war becomes the point instead of the means to the point, you stop fighting the enemy in front of you and start fighting the version of yourself you're afraid of becoming. She looked at her hands. We were very close to that line. We could feel it. So we stopped. Orel pulled up the framework document. This is what we're proposing. Every species, including the Zharathi Dominion, holds equal standing. No conquest, no hierarchy. You keep your worlds, your culture, your identity. You stop taking other species' worlds, their cultures, their identities. She scrolled to the cooperative provisions. In return, we work together on projects no single species can manage alone. Deep space exploration, megastructure construction, collective defense against external threats. And if an external threat appears, Vethmar said slowly, you would defend us. Every member defends every other member, Oral said, including a lot of humans, who have spent 2 centuries keeping themselves very carefully busy so they don't think about how much they miss having something to fight for. Vethmar looked at the framework document. Then he looked at Veth Khan. You tried to warn us, he said. I tried to warn you, Veth Khan agreed. Captain Oral warned me first. You knew, Vethmar said to Oral. At the first meeting. You already knew how this would end. Oral was quiet for a moment. I hoped it wouldn't go this far, she said. I really did. She picked up her thermos. But yes, we knew. We've seen how this story goes. We've told it to ourselves in our histories, our films, our books, 1,000 different ways. Species tries to conquer us. We remember what we are. The story ends the same every time. She looked at him directly. What changes is what comes after. And that's the part we want to write differently. The council deliberated for 3 hours. Veth Khan sat outside the chamber and Oral sat beside him, and they did not speak for a long time. Above them, through the observation window, the Terran fleet held its position, patient, still, a question. Veth Khan said finally, Go ahead. You've been trying for 200 years to be something other than what you were, he said. Does it work? Does it actually work, or do you just carry it underneath everything else waiting? Oral considered this honestly. Both, she said. You carry it. You always carry it. But carrying something and being controlled by it are different things. She looked at the ships above. We built those in 6 weeks. We'll decommission most of them when this is done, and our people will go back to making freighters and colony ships and deep space research platforms. She paused. But we'll remember that we can. That's the part that never goes away. The knowledge that it's still there, she looked at him. We just decide every day that we'd rather use it for something else. The chamber doors opened. The Grand Executor emerged, the Zharathi Dominion. Vethmar said, accepts the terms of the Galactic Continuity Framework. He extended his upper limb, and Oral took it, her grip firm and steady, and shook. Welcome to the community, she said. Behind him, through the window, the lights of 2,000 warships began one by one to turn and hold position. Not leaving. Not advancing. Simply there. The way a species remains present in the memory of anyone who has seen what they can do. The war was over. The longest part was just beginning. What peace remembers 12 years later. Ambassador Veth Khan walked through the central hub of Continuity Station. The station was enormous. Not Zharathi enormous, not designed for intimidation, but enormous the way something gets when 200 species contribute to building it, and nobody can agree to stop adding sections. Its architecture was a layered record of every species that had joined the framework. Zharathi stonework alongside Terran structural geometries alongside the bioluminescent construction methods of the Trellin Collective. It looked, depending on which corridor you were in, like a cathedral, a laboratory, a garden, or something with no category in any single species' vocabulary. Veth Khan had an office here now. He had been appointed the Zharathi seat on the framework's diplomatic council. He had also, without entirely planning to, become the person that new species representatives sought out when they wanted to understand how the GCF actually worked. Not how it worked on paper, how it worked in practice. The answer he gave them was always the same. It works, he said, because the humans made it work. And the humans made it work because they needed something to do. He was on his way to the main council chamber when he passed the observation lounge and saw Nadia Orel sitting at the viewport. She was older now, her dark red hair fully silver, her face carved with the particular lines of someone who had spent a long time looking at difficult things and deciding what to do about them. She was still carrying the thermos. He stopped. "You're early," he said. "The briefing isn't for another hour." "I know," she said. "New species. I like to sit with it for a while before I go in." He sat down across from her. Through the viewport, the stars were visible in their ordinary array. Somewhere out there, a scout vessel had made first contact with a species called the Zharathi Union. Intelligence reports described them as aggressive, territorial, and currently engaged in the early stages of expanding their influence through military intimidation. The reports did not describe them as unique. They never did. What did the brief say? Vethkan asked. 60 systems. Strong military. History of expanding by conquest. The usual. She looked at the stars. They sent a transmission ahead of the meeting. Standard opening declaration. Superiority claims, demands for acknowledgement, implied threats. She took a sip from her thermos. One of the junior diplomats on my team watched it and asked me how worried we should be. What did you tell him? I told him we should take them seriously as a civilization and not seriously as a threat. She set the thermos down. Then I showed him your first contact. The docking bay footage. He'd read about it in his briefing materials but never watched it. What was his reaction? He laughed, she said. Which is the correct reaction. And then I told him the rest and he stopped laughing, which is also the correct reaction. She looked at Vethkan. He asked me how it ends. I told him the same thing I told you the second time we spoke. Both ways. Either they join or they find out. Which outcome do you expect? Oral thought about this for a long moment. I think they'll join. Most of them do once they see the station and understand what they're actually looking at. She looked at the stars. The ones who've never encountered anything larger than themselves have a specific failure of imagination. They look at a military force and count the ships. They don't look at the civilization behind the ships. We made that mistake, Vethkan said. You made a very common mistake, Orel said without judgment. You saw a small military and interpreted it as weakness. You didn't ask why it was small. Why is it small? She smiled. It was an old smile now, worn in around the edges. Because we don't need a bigger one. And because we're trying to deserve not needing a bigger one. She stood, picking up the thermos. And because keeping ourselves focused on building things instead of destroying them is genuinely a full-time effort, and we'd rather spend the energy there. They walked together toward the council chamber. The corridors were full, as they always were, with representatives from across the framework's membership. Trellan diplomats, Koran scientists, former Zharathi administrators who had traded the architecture of conquest for the slower and stranger architecture of cooperation. Vethkan had come to know many of them. He had also come to know, over 12 years, the particular texture of what humans had built here. It was not a utopia. It was not frictionless. Species disagreed, argued, pulled in competing directions. There were resource disputes and cultural misunderstandings, and more than a few moments when the whole structure seemed in danger of collapsing under its own contradictions. But when those moments came, the humans were always there, not dominating the resolution, not forcing a conclusion, but present, patient, quietly making sure the structure held, as though the thing they were most afraid of was the structure failing. And that fear was enough to make them work harder than anyone else to keep it together. He had once asked General Vasiliev why, directly. She had thought about it for a moment before answering. Because if it falls apart, she said, someone will give us a reason to go back to what we were, and we're not sure we could stop ourselves a second time. The council chamber's doors were open. Inside, the Zharathi transmission was queued on the main display, waiting for the session to begin. The Zharathi Union's representative would appear on screen. They would say words that various members of the council had heard variations of before. They would be aggressive and certain, and completely confident in a superiority that they had never genuinely tested. Vethkan took his seat. Orel took hers. Around them, representatives from 200 species settled into their places. The display activated. The Chronicles appeared. Their species had an insectoid body plan, compound eyes, a posture that radiated aggression. Their leader's first words were delivered in a tone designed to establish dominance, before any response could be offered. "We are the Chronicles Union," the leader said. "We have claimed 60 systems. We have defeated every species that stood against us. We demand the Galactic Continuity Framework acknowledge our authority, or we will demonstrate it." Silence in the chamber. Then Vethkan heard it. The small sound from Orel's direction. The precise, bitten-back quality of someone trying to hold something in. He looked at her. She was pressing her lips together, her eyes bright. He felt his own expression twitch. The Chronicles leader's compound eyes flickered. "You are laughing," the leader said. The words were flat, uncomprehending. "We apologize," Vethkan said and composed himself. He leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about this chamber. Every species you see here made a choice to be here. Some of them made that choice immediately. Some of them needed more time." He paused. "The Zharathi Dominion, my people, controlled thousands of systems when we first encountered humanity. We had been expanding through conquest for 11,000 years. We were by any metric the dominant civilization in our region of space." He let that sit for a moment. "We are now one voice among many in this room." The Chronicles leader was still. "What happened to you?" "We were given a choice," Vethkan said. "Join or find out why the framework exists." He folded his hands on the table. "We found out first. Then we joined. And I will tell you honestly, as one species to another, I am very glad we stopped before finding out any more than we did." Orel set her thermos down softly on the table. "The humans have been at peace for 12 years now," she said. "They're getting comfortable with it again. They really do prefer building things. They've been very happy these past 12 years having projects to focus on instead of wars to fight." The Chronicles leader looked at her. "You are speaking of the humans as though they are not present in this room." "I'm speaking as a human," Orel said. "I'm speaking about my own people because I want to be honest with you." She looked at the display. "We spent 10,000 years fighting each other. We nearly destroyed ourselves doing it. We chose to stop, and it was the right choice, and we are proud of what we've built since." She glanced at the thermos. "We would very much like to keep making that choice. We find it much more interesting than the alternative." She looked up. "So I'm asking you, one species to another, please. Give us the opportunity to show you what this community is. Let us show you what it can be for your people, too." A pause. "Don't make us show you the other thing. We'd have to dust it off, and it still fits, and that's exactly the problem." The Chronicles leader's compound eyes moved across the room. They settled on Vethkan, on Orel, on the 200 species sitting in a chamber built by the same, that had somehow convinced the most dangerous civilization any of them had ever encountered to point itself at construction instead of conquest. "We will review the framework's documentation," the Chronicles leader said slowly. "We will respond within 30 of your standard days." "Take your time," Orel said. "We'll be here." The screen went dark. The room held its collective breath for one more moment. Then Vethkan exhaled. And beside him, Nadia Orel smiled quietly and with no audience in mind, and took a slow sip from her thermos. Outside the station, the stars held their positions, indifferent and ancient. Somewhere in the dark between them, a species was deciding whether to be afraid of the right thing. And here, at the center of something built from the deliberate, careful daily choice to stop, a human sat with coffee and waited. The way humans had learned to wait when they were trying to be patient, with 12,000 years of everything else held very still beneath the surface. Not gone. Never gone, just choosing again to be something better.